Today I'm going to be talking to you about pre, pro and postbiotics. So we'll delve into this topic a little bit deeper and then we'll go through what are each of these things and what differentiates them. So we're looking here, our main topic is around the gut microbiome. So when we're thinking about the microbiome, we often hear about the gut microbiome, but I think at this point it's important to point out that you have lots of microbiomes in your body. You've got microbiomes on your skin, in your gastrointestinal tract, in your lungs, your reproductive system, and all of these microbiomes are talking to each other. So our body is a collection, an ecosystem, as it were, of different microbiomes, and they all interact. Now, so what is a microbiome? Well, it's important here to distinguish between a microbiota and what is the microbiome. So the microbiota refers to microorganisms that live in tandem with our body. So these are bacteria, fungi, viruses, archaea. So these are known as the microbiota. And whenever you look at them in association with their environment, their genes, etc., then that becomes that's the whole microbiome. And these are huge collections of organisms. They outnumber our own genetic makeup by often 100 or more. And they're all interconnected through their metabolisms. So these microorganisms, such as bacteria in our gut, are talking to our own metabolism, and they're influencing enzymes, hormones, chemical messengers, etc., which is why whenever we see an upset in the microbiome, that can have a knock-on effect kind of on the wellness and the health of our whole body. And it's a balancing act. So you've probably heard here about the good bug, bad bug balance. So this is about where, because we have good bugs, that are performing beneficial functions in our microbiome, but we also have some potentially pathogenic bacteria, for example, in our microbiome. And it's important that these don't take over, so we want to keep them suppressed. And that's the job of the good bugs, really, who will outnumber them. They will compete for space on binding sites and so forth within the gut. They will actually kill them directly as well by secreting antimicrobial substances and generally creating an environment that's unfavourable for those pathogens. So our good bugs might be influencing the pH of the gut through the release of short chain fatty acids, for example, and that more acidic pH that they induce helps to keep down the pathogens, helps to keep down the bad bugs. So lots of different complex mechanisms that they kind of keep those bad bugs suppressed. And this environment is very dynamic. There's chatter between all these organisms and between them and our metabolism the whole time, complex interactions. And you've probably heard, for example, of the gut-brain axis, and this is where even what's going on in our gut and that microbiome in our gut can influence our behaviour, and that's through sort of chemical messengers and so forth that go up this gut-brain axis through hormones, through chemicals and so forth, and can influence behaviour. So for example, by manipulating the gut bacteria, you can actually, it's been shown in some dogs that it actually can calm down behaviours. So where animals are a little bit hyper and so forth, there's studies that have shown that introducing a particular probiotic can actually help induce calmer behaviours. But on the whole, what are these microbiota doing? So they're playing these key roles. So in our energy regulation, obviously in digestion, their role in bile acid metabolism is really important. Mineral absorption, so they help to facilitate minerals from the gut into our body, and then also synthesizing things like B vitamins as well. The most obvious role that we know about as well, for quite a long time has been their gut barrier function, so helping to kind of keep that gut barrier, that protective layer, that protective immune layer in the gut to help to keep it functioning well as such an important one to stop translocation and so forth. And these microbiota in the gut are going to be talking with some of the cells within that layer to help it to function better. And if we think about it, that makes sense, that it has the influence on our immune system and kind of stopping these pathogens from getting into our body, because about 70% of the body's immune cells can be found in the gut. And there's a very obvious reason for that. We're ingesting food, our gut is open to kind of the environment. If you think about it, it's a tube that goes from our mouth right to the other end. And therefore kind of there is potential for these invaders really to get into our body in that way. So our gut layer, our gut barrier has got to be performing very well. Now, we hear a lot these days about dysbiosis, and dysbiosis is really, I think of it as when the microbiome goes wrong, so whenever things get out of kilter. It's an imbalance in that microbiota, and this can be caused by lots of different things, sometimes kind of as a result of some kind, say the animal gets some kind of insult to its body, an infection or so forth. But also we know that things like long-standing problems like chronic diarrhea, quite often there's a dysbiosis associated with it as well. And so our aim nutritionally is to try and help to restore that good microbiome balance. We still have to look at what the underlying cause was. So for example, it might have been that maybe antibiotics at some point have upset the gut balance. So we have to kind of look going forward at, how are we using antibiotics? How judicious, do we need to be with them and so forth? So we need to address the underlying problem if we can. Maybe that underlying problem is a food allergy, that can be addressed through finding the right diet for that pet. But then also helping to rebalance the animal, addressing this dysbiosis. And there's different ways to do that, and I've listed some of them here. So dietary modulation, it might be antimicrobials in particular instances. But really in our nutritional arsenal, we have, as I say, the main diet that we're using. It's macronutrient makeup of that diet. That is kind of the balance of the fats, the proteins, the carbs, etc. in it. But then also things like prebiotics, probiotics, symbiotics. And then something, again, you're going to be hearing more and more about is the fecal microbial transplantation. So this is a technique where bacteria, so the gut microbiota, are harvested from one animal, from a donor, and are transplanted either through a capsule that's eating or sometimes via an enema into another animal, and then that population of bacteria that's introduced help that animal to kind of reset its own microbiome. But where possible, dietary manipulation should always be the first approach. So seek to mend first with diet, and we know that up to about 2/3 of chronic enteropathy cases, for example, can be helped by modifying the diet. So when we think, I mentioned about this microflora balance getting out of kilter, and this can happen in many different instances, and it may not necessarily be due to illness. It can be, for example, infection, but it can also be kind of transitions in life stages, so from going from puppies to adult to senior, there can be changes within the body's makeup that can induce an imbalance. Stress as well. So if you think about kind of everyday stressors for animals, they might be maybe they've had an incident out on their walk, or maybe they're going into a cattery or a kennel. Maybe they've got a visit to the vets coming up, which can be stressful in itself, and we shouldn't underestimate really the effect of stress on the body and subsequently on the microbiome as well. Dietary changes, so we always look to try and make dietary changes slowly when we can, given a week to 10 days for a changeover. That gives a chance for the enzymes in the body to adapt, to digest whatever that food is, but it also then gives time for the microbiome to shift, because your microbiome, the bugs that are in your body will reflect what you eat. They've adapted, they've co-evolved along with us, so they've adapted to whatever the nutrients, whatever food you're giving them. So again, a sudden change in those nutrients means that your gut microbiome then is upset as well. We're going to come on to talking about antibiotics in a little while as well. So first of all, let's delve into probiotics and what are they. So this is the one that you're probably more familiar with. So these are live bacteria that can help by a variety of mechanisms to shift the microbiota towards more beneficial bacteria species. And I put in here the World Health Organization definition, because I think this is quite important really, because it kind of spells out some key factors that you have to have in place if you're going to have an effective probiotic. So there have to be live microorganisms, and that's really important because they've got to be live when they get to the place in the body where they're going to be exerting their effect, as it were, which is down in the colon. So they've got to be viable when that animal ingests them, but they've also got to be viable when they reach the colon as well. So these are live microorganisms that, when administered in adequate amounts, and again this is really important because we know that you have to kind of have your minimum viable quantity of those microorganisms, those beneficial bacterial species, in order for them to do their job. If there's too few of them, they maybe can't do the job that you want them to do. So they've got to be alive, they've got to be in adequate amounts, and then they confer a health benefit upon the host. So this is quite important. They have to do something beneficial. They have to have some kind of proven beneficial effect, because otherwise then they are just yet another ingredient that we eat. So they have to be proven to do something, and this is why it's really important to look for proven efficacy of whatever probiotic that you're going to be using. Now, what are prebiotics? So prebiotics, then, I like to think of it as this is the food for the probiotics. This is the food for the bacteria in the gut. It might be the food for the probiotics that you're giving alongside that bacteria, or it might be that you're feeding the existing gut bacteria. So this is an ingredient. It's usually a carbohydrate, but it's a fermentable carbohydrate, so something like fiber. So we know, for instance, that our normal mammalian enzymes can't digest fiber. But fiber is processed by the body, as it were. It is still used as a foodstuff by the body, but it's used kind of when it gets to the colon. And because we don't have the enzymes to digest it, here is the job of the bacteria in the colon will be digesting. In this case, it's fermentation. They're going to be fermenting the fiber, and then they're going to be kind of releasing short chain fatty acids and other beneficial substances from that fiber to help with the body and with its metabolism. They're also going to be producing certain substances that then feed the other microbiota in the gut. So they're feeding kind of us, as their host, as the organism, that's hosting them, but they are also feeding each other as well. So the bacteria are really important, metabolizing substances to then produce other substances that are used by other bacteria and so forth. And then importantly, fiber, I mentioned about short chain fatty acids. So this is one of their major substances that they produce through fermentation, is short chain fatty acids. So things like propionate, butyrate, acetate, and things like butyrate will feed the lining of the colon. So they feed the cells lining the gut. So again, kind of they're helping to maintain and improve the health of the gut themselves. So this is really just summarising what I just mentioned there. So producing these short chain fatty acids, mentioned before about them lowering the pH of the gut, that more acidic environment is less favourable for the growth of those pathogenic organisms. Another thing that they can do as well is within that environment, you're going to also kind of produce something called an ammonia trap. You know, by feeding these prebiotics, you can help to convert ammonia into ammonium ions, and what happens then is those ammonium ions get lost in the feces. This means there's fewer of them to be absorbed into the body and converted into urea. So we think about kind of the job of that conversion, that ammonia to urea. If we can lighten the load on the liver, if we have taken those ammonium ions out in the feces, then that kind of liver conversion doesn't need to take place. And then also the filtering of the urea by the kidneys as well. So again, you can lighten the load of liver and kidneys. Particularly important, you know, if you're maybe you're feeding an animal with kidney disease or liver disease, you know, by adding some prebiotics into the food, some fibres into the food, that can help to lessen their workload. So what are synbiotics? So synbiotics is really a combination. It's a combination of the probiotic and the prebiotic. But in this case, what they've got to do is they've got to show a complementary or a synergistic effect. So they have, I talked before about they have to have some kind of benefit for the animal, for the host in some way. And by putting the prebiotic with the probiotic, then you can get kind of a boosted effect, as it were, from both of them. So there's different ways of defining synbiotics, and I put in here a chart from the ISAPP, and it's a great resource to go and have a look at. These are global experts in the field of pre, pro and postbiotics. They put together this really good website, and they talk about synbiotics quite a lot in there as well. You get different types of synbiotics. So you get complementary symbiotics, or you can get synergistic symbiotics. With the synergistic symbiotics, what you're looking for when you put the pre and the probiotic together, maybe in a supplement that you're feeding, in this case, you're kind of going to be choosing that prebiotic that's specific for the probiotic that you're giving, you know, in that instance. So you have kind of a symbiosis. You've got a doubling, not doubling up, but you have a boosted effect from doing that. So then postbiotics. So postbiotics, you'll hear about more and more, I think. And these used to be called all kinds of things. They used to be called things like tyndallized probiotics or ghost probiotics and things like that. But it was recognised by this body of experts that that didn't lend itself really to keeping track of the clinical evidence, you know, behind these foodstuffs when they were called so many different names. And therefore they agreed a collective name for these, which they gave the name of postbiotics. And it meant that kind of the tracking of the publications and the clinical evidence would be so much easier to do. And that way they could gather together, you know, a large body of evidence really to support their work and their benefits. So what are postbiotics and how do they differ from probiotics? Well, postbiotics, if you think about it, these are inanimate microorganisms, so they are killed microorganisms. But they're maybe taking part of that microorganism, because it was discovered by scientists that even if you kind of took, say, part of a mitochondria or part of a cell wall, that in some instances these could also kind of have effects. These could induce some effects that were similar in some ways to the effects that you saw with the live organism, with the probiotic. And therefore now there is much more examination of what these postbiotics can do. But a particular benefit really with the postbiotics is that because they are dead, they are inanimate, it means that they don't have to sort of be regulated in quite the same way as a probiotic, which is a live microorganism. And therefore it is easier, you know, to get EU permission, you know, for the use of these. It also means that they have a long shelf life. Because they don't need to be kept live and viable on a shelf, it means that they will last a lot longer because they're inanimate as well. So their shelf life is extended, and they kind of are easier, kind of, if you think about kind of that chain from production right through to whenever they're sold, that's easier to maintain as well. So I think kind of we're going to see a lot more of these probiotics coming onto the market in future years, or postbiotics rather. So just thinking about when we select a probiotic, there are a huge number on the market, aren't there, you know, for both people, you know, and for our pets, but they are hugely variable in their quality. So what you've got to do, you've got to look for evidence, and you've got to kind of look for that guarantee of that viable number that you need as well. Probiotics as well, their effect is strain specific. So it means that even sometimes where you've got the same species of a probiotic, you know, for instance, Enterococcus faecium, there are multiple strains within that. And when you have a benefit of one of the strain, that does not automatically mean that that benefit is there for a different strain of that probiotic. So the strains have all their individual effects, as it were. So it's no one size fits all, unfortunately, with this. You've got to kind of look, what is the effect I want it to have? You know, is that going to be on rebalancing, you know, after stress? Is it going to be, you know, with acute diarrhea or something like that, helping the gut microbiome to recover? You know, so you think, what is it that I want this probiotic to do? And then you look for the probiotics and the strains of those probiotics that are proven to do that. Because I say this efficacy does not cross over from one strain to another. And it's highly dependent on the feeding amount given, you know, so again, you need that kind of guaranteed viability. This study on the right that I'm referring to, you can see kind of on the far right. So in this study, they were taking lots of different probiotics off the shelf. They were veterinary probiotics, and then examining them to see, did they contain what they said they contained on the label, and also kind of were they viable in the numbers, you know, that they were claimed on the label. And you can see these numbers up here in the graphics for yourself. So my take-home message is really the quality really varies. So go for a company that you trust and that has evidence behind their product as well, because then you know that you're not just giving that animal something that isn't going to be doing anything, which is not very ethical to kind of give something that is going to have no effect really. Oh, I jumped across one more. So we're thinking about where probiotics could help, and I mentioned before some of the jobs of the microbiota and what they do, and so therefore whenever you're thinking about probiotics, you're going to be kind of thinking about similar things. Now the benefits of probiotics just aren't limited to gastrointestinal things. You know, we can get different probiotics now. You even can see like probiotic shampoos and things like that as well. But for the sake of this presentation, we're looking particularly at GI related things. So things like stress related diarrhea. So we know that stress, you know, has a big impact on the gut microflora. GI upset associated with weaning, you know, so at that time that kind of they're moving kind of off their mum's food, and they're starting to kind of eat their own food. These little puppies and kittens as well, it's a very stressful time whenever they're starting to kind of form their own gut microbiome, so it can help there too. Dietary change or indiscretion is very common, as we know, you know, so animals that are garbage eating or you know, that will be picking up things out on their walk and so forth. And we all know the kind of the acute gastric upsets that those can cause. So again, probiotics can really help in that instance. Food intolerance or maldigestion. So if you've got animals, you know, with an intolerance, maybe that's not immune mediated, it's not a food allergy, but maybe they don't cope well with a particular ingredient or something, it can help to reset their microbiome. And then you've got your non-specific, your acute, your chronic diarrhea, just helping to kind of keep that microbiome as balanced and as well as it can be, so it can perform all its functions that it needs to. Antibiotic-associated diarrhea. So this is something that's been increasingly recognised, and I think we'll probably all have heard about kind of the work coming out, you know, with Jan Sugudolski and his team in Texas A&M lab, looking at the dysbiosis index, which is a measurement that he has of kind of the primary, sort of the most important marker bacteria in the gut. And looking kind of quantifying those markers, and a lot of the time they kind of can represent that there's something not quite right going on in that gut, you know, given by the sign, you know, there's some of these bacteria will be healthy bacteria, and he looks at the relative proportions of those, but also there are some potentially pathogenic bacteria in there as well, and looking at kind of whether they're getting more of a foothold, you know, if the good bacteria aren't keeping them in check. So this is the dysbiosis index, and Jan and his team have seen they've done quite a lot of studies relating to antibiotics and what their effect is on those gut microbiota, things like tylosin, metronidazole, that kind of are, I think, probably one of the more common antibiotics that we reach for in gut problems. But we know now kind of that they can, instead of helping to kind of reset the gut, they can have an effect where they are pretty indiscriminate, you know, in their impact on those gut microflora, and they can have quite a lasting effect as well. So they can kind of knock out the goodies as well as the baddies, and knocking out the goodies, particularly bugs like Clostridium hirenosis, that actually are beneficial to the body in being really good bile acid converters. That you will also hear about some benefits coming from some of the probiotics. Now, these are not licensed in use in the EU. Some of these combinations of probiotics, like DSF and Espulardi, they're not licensed in this country, but there's some really interesting studies now coming mainly from the US into their use, you know, with animals with chronic enteropathy and with cats with chronic constipation. So good to keep abreast of those changes. As I say, we don't have license for these in the EU at the moment, these probiotics. We only have about 5 probiotics that are licensed for use in our pets in the EU at this time. So I'm just going to move on now to Fortiflora, which a lot of you will probably be familiar with, which is our probiotic, Enterococcus faecium SF68 is the strain. And these are the indications for Fortiflora that you can see here. So those gastrointestinal disturbances associated with that microflora imbalance might be stress, antibiotic therapy, and Fortiflora can be really good to use alongside antibiotics, and we'll look at this in a wee minute. But things kind of everyday, more commonplace things like flatulence in dogs, it's been proven to be beneficial. Puppies and kittens, helping that fecal quality to balance out, and then also because it's contained within a really tasty digest, it's a really great palatability enhancer as well for animals maybe that are picky or have a poor appetite for other reasons. Comes in 2 different formats, a 30 pack, so that's 30 sachets. Each sachet is 1 gram, and it's just the same dose every day. Doesn't matter whether you know your dog is 30 kilos or whether it's 10 kilos, it's still a 1 gram sachet a day. So you've got a 30-day supply, but also now we have new 7-day supplies as well. And this is what's in it. So it's our proprietary blend of Enterococcus faecium SF68, guaranteed with a live viable number. And part of what makes it really special, I think, is that it's microencapsulated, you know, so it's kind of got these layers that are around containing the live bacteria that help to protect it. They help to have it viable on the shelf, so whenever that animal eats that probiotic, you know it's containing the viable, the alive probiotic in the quantities that it needs to be. And then as those little probiotic spheres. If you ever open the Fortiflora packet and you spill it out, you'll see kind of, it's like a brown powdery substance. That's the digest, and you'll see the little white spheres of the probiotic in it. So as those little spheres go through the gut, then it's kind of the microencapsulation, kind of it comes apart layers of an onion as it goes through, so that by the time it gets to the colon, then the probiotics release where it needs to do its job. So Enterococcus faecium is a lactic acid bacteria. It's a bacteria that's been around a long time, used in human and veterinary as well, and is proven to be safe. And that's one of the reasons that we choose this as our probiotic, because obviously with probiotics you want them to be safe, to not to take over the gut, to not replicate extensively within the gut either. So probiotics really are there to do a job. They come in, they help the gut reset, and then they go on about their business. So they're there with a very specific purpose in mind, but because they're not a long-lasting thing, then it means, you know, that after a week or whatever, it'll have done its job, and then the body resets itself. So you don't want them to be long-lived in the gut. You want them to kind of have their short-acting effect, and that's what makes them safe, really. These are the studies of Fortiflora. If anyone would like to read through them, we're very happy to send them to you. So I mentioned before about the use of Fortiflora SF68 alongside antibiotics, and there have been very few studies done globally into probiotics in pets with antibiotics, but 2 out of the 4 studies that have been done, 2 out of the 4 were done by Purina using Fortiflora, and you can see here the results using alongside metronidazole in dogs and amoxicillin clavulanate in cats, and you can see here the benefits in helping kind of with those with recovery of those pets, you know, shortening the number of days, you know, where they had a poor fecal score as well, so kind of helping that diarrhea to resolve quicker. I've just popped up here some of the resources in ISAPP for you to have a little look at. If you're interested in this area, and I think it's fascinating, do have a wee look through it, and you can see the definition of all of these different areas of these great new nutritional supplements that are coming through. So I'd urge you to have a wee read in there. But of course, we're here at Purina. You know, if you do want to have any more information at all, we've got lots and lots of resources, really interesting articles in this area to help you keep abreast of it. So do look out and see kind of, you know, what's happening, you know, in the studies coming through in this area, pre, pro and postbiotics. It's really, really interesting, emerging area of research. But as a reminder, really, it's just one part of the GI puzzle. You know, it's really important to look at